I solemnly swear all the testimony that you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Sir, you may be seated.
Thank you.
Would you state your name, spelling your last name, please?
I'm Dr.Park Dietz, D-I-E-T-Z.
You may proceed, Mr. McKay.
Dr. Dietz, will you please advise the jury of your educational background, beginning with college?
I graduated from college at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York in 1970 with a bachelor's degree in psychology and biology, and then entered medical school. I received my next degree, which was a Doctor of Medicine degree, from the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in Baltimore in 1975. And in the same year that I received the MD, I also received a master's degree in public health, also from Johns Hopkins University. Much later, I received another doctorate, a PhD in sociology, also from Johns Hopkins. I had done my coursework toward that while I was a student, and then wrote a dissertation some years thereafter.
Did you then have any postgraduate training?
Yes, I did.
Would you advise the jury of that?
After finishing medical school, I began residency, which is specialized training in a medical specialty at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and for 2 years I was an assistant resident in psychiatry at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And then I spent 1 year as resident in psychiatry and chief fellow in forensic psychiatry at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And so that fulfilled the general training requirements in psychiatry, and also provided me with specialized training in the subspecialty of forensic psychiatry.
Would you please tell the jury what positions you have held since you completed your training, and briefly summarize your responsibilities in each position?
The first position that I held after training was as an assistant professor of psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. I was assigned to the McLean Hospital, which is a private psychiatric teaching hospital of Harvard. And at that time, the McLean was attempting to work with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to try to provide services to a notorious institution known as the Bridgewater State Hospital, a maximum security institution for the criminally insane that had been the subject of several scandals in the news prior to that. And as McLean was trying to transform it into a teaching hospital for Harvard, I was asked to come up to Harvard and to head the forensic psychiatry program in this effort. And so for 2 years, my task was to run the forensic psychiatric service at that institution. Now, forensic psychiatry is the application of the principles and practice of psychiatry for legal purposes, and that particular institution, Bridgewater, received from the trial courts of Massachusetts defendants charged with crimes whom someone thought might be mentally disordered, and the questions that we were asked to evaluate were whether the defendant was responsible at the time of the crime, whether he was ready for trial, and certain other issues. We had a caseload of, I believe, about 1,000 or 1,200 cases a year with those questions. My first year there, I didn't have very much help trying to see all of those people and was busy. The second year, I was able to recruit some colleagues, and additional staff began to do that, and so it was somewhat more manageable. And after 2 years of doing all of these evaluations and testifying in court on those cases, I then stopped doing that and spent my third year at Harvard principally involved in one particular case. I had been retained by the U.S. Department of Justice to work on the investigation of John Hinckley in connection with the attempted assassination of President Reagan. And what I was asked to do was to lead a team that evaluated Mr. Hinckley. And for the bulk of a year, I spent my time evaluating him, interviewing people whom he knew, and reading about him and talking to him and looking at all the evidence in that case. I did some research the same year, but he was principally my practice for that year. Then my fourth year at Harvard, I spent most of my time doing research on mentally disordered offenders, particularly a study that looked at men who were charged with some violent offense and who were referred for a psychiatric examination, and comparing those whose victims died and those whose victims didn't, and trying to look at what the general patterns were in the behavior of people who were assessed as to whether they were mentally disordered offenders and the kinds of mentally disordered offenders that were to be found. I did some consultation throughout those 4 years privately in other states and some in Massachusetts, and began to consult in both criminal and civil cases around the country. Then after those 4 years at Harvard, I was invited to move to Virginia and to take up a position at the University of Virginia, which had an institute known as the Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy. And that institute is still in existence. I was asked to become the medical director of it and to assume responsibilities at that university, and initially went there as an associate professor of law, teaching in the law school, and an associate professor of psychiatry at the medical school, and was eventually promoted to professor of law and professor of behavioral medicine and psychiatry, teaching in both the law school and the medical school. My responsibilities there were really at all three of these institutions. At the law school, I taught courses in psychiatry and criminal law, law and psychiatry, criminal behavior, criminal violence, criminal behavior and public policy, and co-taught courses in some related areas like law and medicine or law and public health. In the medical school, I was responsible for directing the fellowship program in forensic psychiatry, which is something I'd also done at Harvard for a few years, which is to train psychiatrists in the subspecialty of forensic psychiatry so that they could spend a full year focusing on the legally important issues that psychiatrists are sometimes asked to address. So I ran the fellowship program at the med school, and at our clinic, which was based on hospital grounds, we would evaluate defendants referred from principally Virginia to be evaluated, and that was part of the Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy, where my role was to run the forensic psychiatry clinic, to be responsible for training students who would come through the institute. These included law students, medical students, social work students, psychology graduate students, and to teach seminars there, show students how to do evaluations, and oversee or personally conduct evaluations there at the clinic. I was there at Virginia from 1982 until 1988, and then took a sabbatical leave for a year, and at that time went to California to be working on some writing about research that I'd done in the past, and decided to remain in California and did not return to the University of Virginia. And so since 1988, I've been in Newport Beach, California. I resigned from the University of Virginia faculty in 1989 after being away for a year, and since then have taught at UCLA. Today I'm clinical professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences at UCLA, which is the University of California at Los Angeles. I am on the part-time faculty, which is what a clinical professor does, and most of my time is spent evaluating individuals in connection with various kinds of legal problems, and consulting to courts, consulting to attorneys, or consulting to law enforcement agencies and corporations, generally about the more unusual kinds of criminal behavior. And so today I have an unusual practice in which I see the more extreme forms of behavior that arise, mostly in North America, occasionally outside this country, but always something rather unusual.
Are you a member of any professional societies?
Yes, I am.
Would you advise the jury of those societies, some of them?
Well, I'm a member of quite a few, but the organizations in which I've been most active are really just three. One's the American Psychiatric Association, in which connection I've served on a number of committees. I chaired the Committee on the Misuse and Abuse of Psychiatry in the United States. I've served on some other components of the organization. I've also been active in the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. That's an organization made up of forensic scientists from various disciplines: pathology, toxicology, forensic dentistry, and psychiatry, as well as others. And in that organization, I was the chair of what was then the psychiatry section for 3 terms. And then I spent a term on the executive committee of the overall organization. I had been involved in planning programs at various points for the organization, and have served on the editorial board of the Journal of Forensic Sciences, which the Academy publishes, and am quite active at their annual meetings, presenting papers, and participating in the meetings, lecturing from time to time. And then finally, the organization that I've probably been most active in is known as the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. That's an organization made up of those members of the National Psychiatric Organization with a special interest in the legal issues in psychiatry. And I became active in that organization even while I was still a medical student and not able to officially join. And since I've been able to be a member of it, I've served in most of the offices of the Academy. I'm currently in an office known as counselor. I've been the secretary for a couple terms. I've been a counselor before. I've been a vice president of it. And I've served on many of the committees over the years for the Academy, have lectured dozens of times at the annual meetings of the organization, served for, I think, 10 years on the editorial board of the Journal, and have been quite active in the affairs.
May I request that the bailiff distribute to the jury copies of the curriculum?